Hi everyone, welcome to Mind Body Fitness Recovery and Wellness. I'm Pam. Today's recovery and wellness video is about the behaviors that my parents engaged in, and the reasons why I ended up in recovery. I've been in recovery for 7 years. This video isn't about blaming or shaming or judging, but after 7 years of recovery, I fully understand now that my parents weren't able to give me an emotionally and physically safe environment to grow up in because their parents didn't do that, my grandparents, and my grandparents' parents didn't do that for them. I understand that now. I get it. My parents were supposed to teach me how to approach my life, my relationships. They were supposed to teach me how to express and receive love, how to handle disagreements, how to process my feelings. My parents were supposed to shape the color the lens through which I saw myself and how I mattered in the world, how I fit in the world. And they were supposed to teach me how to organize meaning with all my human interactions, with all types of relationships. And they could not do that. They could not regulate and process or know how their own feelings, and they couldn't handle their own feelings or how to handle agreements, disagreements, or express and receive love. They couldn't do that on their own or with each other. I grew up in a home where, with two adults that were toxic and dysfunctional. And I believe they didn't even realize it. They could not possibly have taught me how to build a narrative about who I was, how to build the narrative that could teach me that I mattered, that I had emotional, mental, and spiritual mental health. They couldn't do that. They did not do that. I had to teach that on my own. I had to parent myself. When I entered recovery 7 years ago, I realized that it wasn't even a reparent. It was parenting myself because I never was parented properly. I didn't know that I mattered until fairly recently, and I'm in my early 60s. It's important to say here that I grew up in the early 60s through the 70s, and parents, under the guise of discipline, would often abuse their children physically, emotionally, and mentally. And now in 2024, we have that dialogue going, that we can speak up about this more, and people are coming out and talking about what they went through. So others that are going through it now in 2024, or realize that they did go through it earlier, they can start to recover and talk about this with people who understand what they're going through and help them navigate through recovery. My parents didn't set out to abuse me. Nonetheless, it happened. And again, there's no blaming, shaming, or judgment here. Not anymore anyway. But before deciding to make this video, I had to make sure that I was completely transparent about what happened to me growing up in an environment. And only then could I make this video. It had to be completely organic. And I had to be completely transparent about what abuse did to me. And only then could I post this video. And this list is not exhaustive. These are behaviors that happened to me growing up. And they're not in any particular order, because what affected me the most might not affect you like it affected me. So they're not in the most abusive down to the least, or the least to the most. Out of these 10 abusive behaviors, most of them took place in my early teens. Before graduation, only 3 of them that I can remember started when I was in elementary school. The first behavior came from my father. I learned fathers teach their daughters who they are as sexual beings. I'm speaking as a heterosexual woman right now. Dads or other male caregivers in their early lives set the first model of how our relationships with a man should be. Our first attachment patterns shape our expectations for future attachments, for better or for worse. Fathers should be teaching their daughters and treating them in such a way that they understand their worth in the context of an intimate relationship. They teach. My father should have taught me that I should be treated with nothing less than complete respect by an intimate partner. The behavior that I was privy to and was exposed to on a consistent basis started when I was about 16 or 17. My father would make sexually provocative statements about other women or about me to me. And these are real situations from my life. I didn't have to make up anything. I'd be out to lunch with my father. He would invite me out to lunch sometimes, and I would go to the city where he worked, and we would often go to a deli right near where he worked, and there'd be windows all around us. And he would say things like, turn around. He said, look at that woman. She's really tight. She looks like she's wearing a straitjacket. Talking about her fit body. And he'd make comments about my friends, like, your friend is growing up to be quite a beautiful woman. She's filling out in all the right places. This is embarrassing. This is sexually provocative boundary crossing. And another example, I came home from a date one night, and I was probably 16, 17 years old, and I was sitting in the kitchen having a snack, and he came out. And he sat right across from me, and he looked at my face, and he studied it, and he said, God, you look like you've been making out like mad. These are just a few examples. These are sexually provocative statements that were made to me as a very young woman and a teenager from my father, my major predominant male caregiver. This is considered abuse. This was abuse. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know how to process what was being said to me. I felt very uncomfortable. I didn't know why. I didn't know why. I have since learned that my father crossed boundaries with me that never should have been crossed. This is a boundary issue. Neither of my parents knew about boundaries. If you don't know how to set boundaries in your own relationship, you can't possibly teach them to your children. They couldn't possibly teach me. I know that my parents couldn't do that because they weren't taught that themselves. A father who speaks sexually provocatively to his daughter is crossing a critical boundary that never should have been crossed. This is a toxic, dysfunctional behavior from a male caregiver. It's the perfect example of a toxic behavior of a male caregiver to a young female because boundaries are non-existent in the relationship. The second behavior that my parents engaged in was to trash talk the other parent in front of me. I could not process my parents' resentment or anger or disgust toward the other parent. And I actually internalized this by thinking it was my fault, that I was the bad one. I couldn't process this in a healthy way. Why is mommy saying these things about daddy? Or why is daddy saying these things about mommy? An older child is able to hear the same thing and think, Jesus, mom's pissed at dad or dad's pissed at mom. They can take themselves out of it and not blame themselves. Young children could not do that. I could not do that. I couldn't understand that it wasn't about me. I would often hear things like, your fucking father, ABC, or my father would say to my mother in front of me, you still don't know how to set a table, do you? He would say this when one of his dinner condiments were missing from the table. My takeaway as a young child was, I heard this was, not only am I not good enough, but my mother is not good enough either. This was also an emotional boundary violation. A child cannot process. I could not process that kind of anger and resentment or disgust from one parent to another, and without internalizing it and thinking that it was my fault. I could go on and on here. And if I really sat down and remembered all the things that was said in front of me about one of my parents to me, I know they were angry. I knew they were resentful towards each other. I didn't know at the time. When you're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you can't process this kind of behavior. And I internalized it and thought that it was my fault. I was the reason why they were so angry at each other. I must be the reason why. What else could it be? I'd often hear parents that were divorced and they did not talk about the other parent negative way towards their kids. And what a blessing that was. What a gift your parents gave those children, gave you, if your parents are divorced and they didn't trash talk each other in front of you. That's a true gift. Okay, this is a good time. take 4 deep breaths, 4 deep cleansing breaths. I know I can use them right now. Deep breaths to reduce heart rate, decrease blood pressure. And they give me an immediate boost of well-being. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth or nose. I'll breathe in and count for your benefit. And the count of 4 in, hold for a few seconds, and breathe out for 8. The breath out should always be longer than the breath in. So breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. And breathe out for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. And breathe out for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. Breathe out for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. Breathe out for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's do one more. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. Breathe out for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Try to do that at least 3 times a day. Reduces heart rate, reduces blood pressure, and gives you an overall sense of well-being. Okay, on with it. Another behavior that my parents engaged in with me was telling me that I was too sensitive. Or they would say, especially my mother, don't be so sensitive. Heard that quite often, as if it was a disgusting trait. If I had to guess now how often I heard it, it'd probably be a few times a week. And often the situation where I would hear this was because my parents engaged in one of their toxic behaviors verbally, when they were verbally abusive, and I became very quiet, or I cried, or I said, "Why did you say that to me?" or something like that. For example, anyone who says this is masking their own bad behavior. They can't admit that they had done something or said something that was abusive, hurtful, and obviously incorrect. They blamed me to cowardly take the heat off themselves. It's kind of gaslighting, which is an abusive person's way of trying to convince another that what they know about reality, what they know to be true about reality, what they know to be true about a situation isn't correct, but it is. This is a form of abuse that anyone at any age, but especially for an elementary school child, middle school child, or high school teenager, cannot process correctly. The next behavior that my parents engaged in was not to protect me from the other parent. My mother engaged in this one in particular. My parents each had their own toxicity, their own dysfunctional patterns, and there were times when one of my parents was more abusive than the other. And in this case, it was my mother. My mother just wanted to please my father, so she would allow beatings from my father, and was negligent in protecting me from that. The 5th behavior came from my mother. Again, this behavior started right around the time of puberty, so I was about 13, 14 years old. My mother became very jealous and threatened by the young woman that I was becoming. I was maturing physically, emotionally, and mentally. I wasn't as dependent on her anymore, as much as I was when I was younger. She sensed me not needing her as much, and she developed an insecurity, a resentment, and a jealousy towards me. My father suddenly stopped physically demonstrating his love for me. No, there was no more hugging, no more play wrestles, and those were completely appropriate. And through my mother's own admittance, I found out that she told my father that he shouldn't be acting like that with me because it wasn't appropriate and it made her feel uncomfortable. It was like she felt there wasn't enough attention and love to go around, and she didn't like the attention being drawn away from her. When a mother is jealous of her daughter, that's a tough situation in which that the daughter grows up in. I grew up in a tough situation. The treatment from a mother who was jealous of a daughter, when my mother became jealous of me, It causes unbelievably tremendous emotional wounds and shame for me, for a daughter. It wasn't until I was in my mid-50s that I realized just how deep the emotional scarring was in me being raised in an environment like this. Again, I don't think my mother set out to hurt me. I really don't. She was treated badly by her mother, and because of this, there is no way she could have raised me any differently. Nonetheless, it happened. The sixth behavior that my parents engaged in was name calling. It's one thing to hear your parent call you baby if it's a term of endearment, but it's the tone of their voice that was used. It was one of disgust. The look on their face was one of disgust, and it was abusive. Another boundary that's crossed. I was often called this because I would get sad at certain things, maybe some certain things that had nothing to do with my parents. I was called a crybaby often. I'd be called sourpuss if I wasn't in a mood to be happy, and I had a right to be. The worst name that I was called came from my father. He would often refer to me as a cunt, and there really isn't anything here to say much more. It's kind of a given that that's tremendously inappropriate and extremely abusive and crossing a huge emotional, mental boundary. At 14, 15, 16, I heard that C word used on the bus back and forth from junior high. It usually came from a girl in the back that would sit at the back of the bus, and she'd say it when she was angry. I hadn't heard that word before, so when I heard my father say it, I naturally processed it like he was angry with me, he doesn't like me, and I must be bad. Another behavior my parents engaged in was to punish me for stupid reasons. I got punished if I didn't finish the food on my plate. I got punished if I didn't get dressed fast enough. I got punished if I didn't tie my shoelaces properly, and I got punished if I did not put my bike on the kickstand, but instead laid it down, whether it was on the grass or on the walkway or in the driveway. I internalize this as nothing I did was right. Even the little things, treatment like this, cannot it cannot enable a child to form a good sense of self, of who they are, and the daily narrative is not good that it ends up producing about who they are, about who I was. The eighth behavior that my parents engaged in was demanding that I either hug or kiss or sit on the laps of other adults that requested it. I was very young, maybe 6 or 7 when this started, and it was probably right up until the age of 11 or 12. It made me uncomfortable to do these things. I didn't want to do them. My parents were angry that I didn't want to do these things. I was shamed for it, for not wanting to sit on the lap of another, usually male adult that requested it, or to give them a kiss, or give them a hug. And I didn't want to do it. My parents would tell me to stop being stubborn and give Mr. So-and-so a hug or give Mr. So-and-so a kiss and go ahead and sit on the lap. And it doesn't matter if you're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Parents should never make you do anything like that. I didn't find this out until, again, like 7 years ago when I entered recovery. That's crossing huge boundaries, safety boundaries, emotional and physical safety boundaries. My parents' main job was to help me feel safe, and I needed to go to them for emotional and physical safety, and a parent demanding that, things like that, sitting on laps or kissing, is traumatic and causes shame. The ninth behavior that my parents engaged in was really specific to my father. He would spend more time engaged in his own activities at the expense of spending time with me and my mom. And this was usually on a Saturday. My mother would get very upset, very emotional. My father would leave on a Saturday morning and not return until 6 or 7 o'clock at night. I saw how upset she would get, and I was often dragged into it. She would often call me upstairs after he left on a Saturday morning. I'd be watching cartoons, and we would separate their twin beds. We moved them apart, we moved them together. Her being upset was not abusive towards me. It was me being so young at the age of 11, not being able to process what was happening with her. That's an example of a parent crossing an emotional boundary with me. I couldn't process that kind of shit. I didn't know what was going on, and so I thought I wasn't good enough. I thought I was the cause of her tears. I did not know that it was my father's behavior that was causing her so much pain. And how could I process it any other way? There was no other way that I could process it at that age. The last behavior um, was the physical abuse that took place in my childhood environment growing up. My mother was big on slapping my face in certain circumstances. I remember one incident where she and I were standing at the stove. We were cooking, and I think I rolled my eyes about something, and I got slapped across the face. And then I was told, "You won't do that again, will you?" I didn't know what I said, so I don't know if I ever engaged in that behavior again. But I'm pretty sure it was I rolled my eyes at something. I don't even know if it was something that she said. It wasn't even about her. The takeaway for me was that I didn't matter. My feelings didn't matter. My thoughts didn't matter. My opinions didn't matter because I deserved a conversation about what just happened and never got it. And lastly, there were instances where I was told to go to my room. My father took his belt off, told me to lean over my bed, and then I was beaten with the belt. This happened 3 or 4 times, and this was most traumatic for me. There was never an explanation as to why this happened. My mother allowed it to happen. She actually told me that your father has to do this. Despite my pleadings, my begging not to have this happen, it did. A complete violation of me as a human being. So I know I said a lot. This video is my attempt to establish a channel built on complete integrity, trust, complete transparency. So if you can relate to anything I've said in this video, please put it in the comments. I would love to hear your feedback. I would love for you to subscribe, and I would love for you to like this video. When we subscribe to channels and when we like videos, it gets it out to more people that need it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. Namaste until we meet again. Bye-bye.